The city of New York is by far the greatest of all. New York City culture is one of relentless ambition, filled with people whose drive knows no limits, and these are their stories. This is New York City Pulse. Hello, New York, and welcome to episode number 9 of New York City Pulse. I'm Zane, and today my distinguished guest is Jordan J. Metzger. He's a commercial real estate attorney and a partner at the law firm Schotz. Jordan plays a significant role in complex commercial real estate transactions, including debt and equity transactions, leasing transactions, and ground-up new developments across all asset classes. Jordan, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. To start us off, Jordan, I know a bit about your backstory. I know you're a born and bred New Yorker. But talk to our viewers about, a bit about what it was like growing up and sort of what drew you to law and why specifically commercial real estate.
Sure. So, as you said, New York born and bred. I was born in Rego Park, Queens, and lived there until age 9. And then my family moved to the South Shore of Long Island, where I grew up. Um, Younger brother, younger sister. We all went to public school on Long Island. For college, I went to SUNY Albany, and then on to Cardozo Law School here in New York, where I met my now wife of going on 36 years. So law school was good to me in many respects. After college, moved into the city for law school, lived in the Kips Bay area.
Where around Kips Bay?
During law school, I lived on 29th between 2nd and 3rd. And then after we got married, I lived on 24th and 2nd. For several years, I wanted to start a family. Couldn't afford a 2-bedroom at the time. And so we moved back to Queens. I lived in Forest Hills for about 6 years. Had 2 of our 3 kids while living in Forest Hills. And then we wanted to, grow the family and have a 3rd child. And we moved to Westchester in 1993. So raised all 3 kids in Westchester County, New York. And I've practiced real estate law my entire career in New York. My practice is both local and national. I actually started out as a real estate litigator out of law school, worked for a small real estate litigation firm downtown, cut my teeth there. And I think in retrospect, it's made me a better deal lawyer. I'm able to anticipate, how contract provisions are going to be interpreted. If they are litigated, how a judge is going to look at it, how an arbitrator is going to look at it, whether it's a lease, a loan document, or a contract. And so starting out as a litigator, I think, was good for my career. During the course of my 30 plus years of practice, I've worked for small firms, mid-sized firms, big international global firms, and I've also been general counsel to a real estate fund for 9 years. So I've really gotten to taste, all the elements of private and in-house practice. I've been at Schotz now over 8 years, and it's been a terrific platform. As we've talked about the various aspects of my practice, whether it's acquisition, sale, leasing, development. We can also provide environmental and construction in relation to real estate deals. So it's really a terrific platform to provide our clients, the full menu of real estate services in connection with any deal that comes across our desk.
Yeah.
So
Were your parents, are they lawyers or
no,
what drew
no,
you to the
no,
legal
no,
field?
no lawyers in the family. Growing up, my father owned a family printing and advertising business. My mom was trained as a school teacher and did teach public school until she started having children. Then she was a stay-at-home mom, and ultimately, when we grew up, she went into the family business and helped my dad in terms of accounting and bookkeeping. So no lawyers in the family, and of my 3 children, no lawyers either, even though their 2 parents are lawyers. So
Oh,
interesting.
so what specialty is your wife in the legal field?
So she was a litigator for many years. practicing full-time and part-time, depending upon, when the kids arrived. And over time, she also started teaching Jewish education, and now has basically retired from the practice of law, but has become a full-time Jewish educator, Hebrew tutor. So she's not practicing any longer. And none of the kids exhibited an interest in law. I joke that, growing up, they would see me sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning reading a 100-page loan agreement, and they said, "Dad, that's not
Not
for
for
me,
me.
not for
Yeah.
me." So, look, they're working hard in each of their respective professions. So, I give them credit, and they're all happy in their respective professions. So
And
that's
that's what
what that
matters most.
that that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, what drew you to real estate law in particular?
I kind of liked it in law school. I enjoyed property. In my third year, I took a real estate transactions class. I enjoyed it immensely, did really well, connected with the professor, who was an adjunct professor, who's a partner at a major New York City law firm who was teaching the course. We connected well. And so I kind of looked for jobs upon graduation in real estate, and ultimately, got my first job, as I said, at a downtown real estate firm that did both transactional and litigation work. It was the early 80s, and that was the co-op condo go-go craze at the time. And so I did a lot of co-op and condo conversion work and tenant work, and offering plans and related kinds of work. So it was an exciting time to get into real estate, and I stayed in real estate, for the rest of my career.
Yeah, and it's been 30 years that you've been in practice.
30 plus, yeah.
30 plus.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone through several cycles in the last 30 years, right? What do you believe is different about this cycle that we're in with the coronavirus? What are you seeing that's been different from 2008, 2002 in the
Sure. So in '07, '08, the real estate market crashed because underwriting was done, as most people would agree now in retrospect, in not a very conservative way. That deals were underwritten in a very cowboy-esque type of methodology, and the credit markets were just anxious to put money out regardless of value. And when the market crashed, the values didn't support, all the debt that had been placed on real estate at the time. I believe that the industry learned its lesson from '07, '08. And as a result, deals that have been underwritten over the last 10 years have been much more conservatively underwritten, both from an acquisition and a financing standpoint. And so, now that we've hit this bump in the road, resulting from the coronavirus, the values have generally, maintained themselves, at least as relates to the fundamentals. I mean, there's nothing that we can do about, shutting down of retail and shutting down of offices, and those tenants, not being able to pay rent. But the over leverage that we experienced in '07 and '08, I think, is not a factor here. And so it's going to be a question of getting past, these, 3, 4, 6, 12 months, when businesses can make a valiant attempt to get back to business. People will get reemployed. Rent rolls will start building up again, and those values will come back over time.
in your practice right now,
Yeah.
what is the number one issue that you're discussing with your colleagues and the number one problem that your clients are facing?
Yeah, so I think the one major thing that has pulled the reins on our deal flow is the fact that the capital markets have been frozen, for all intents and purposes. And that's because, especially as relates to, retail and office assets, it's difficult to underwrite. You don't know which tenants are going to pay rent when. Rent is the lifeblood of any commercial real estate asset. And because owners operators can't project with any degree of certainty what their rent roll is going to look like next month, they can't go to the lending market and say, lend me, 70% of my acquisition price, because there's no way for the lenders to value what that asset is without knowing what the cash flow is going to be next month and the month after. And so, while cash deals have been closing, um, deals that are being closed as part of 1031 transactions, which are deferred, exchange transactions for tax purposes, where there is cash sitting at a qualified intermediary, those deals are closing. Some multifamily deals are closing because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac continue to fund multifamily loans. And some industrial self-storage warehouse deals are closing as well. But in large part, office and retail has come to somewhat of a grinding halt until, until the underwriting fundamentals people can get their arms around the underwriting fundamentals to assess value.
Mhm. Now, earlier when we spoke, you mentioned that some lenders are beginning to evaluate deals. So, what
Yeah.
is different about those deals that they have more of an appetite for it?
It may be a construction loan on a development site that isn't necessarily today predicated on rent flow. I mean, the lifespan of a construction project can run anywhere between 18 and 24 months. And so if you have developers and lenders that have the foresight and the faith in the market, such that when these projects come out of the ground in 18 and 24 months, things will be back to some semblance of normal, then those lenders, are being bullish on that market and are starting to dip their toes and look to make loans into those kinds of projects. So that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing, and it's mostly from more of the opportunistic debt funds as opposed to the traditional commercial banks that are still taking a wait and see approach.
And the 18 to 24-month timeline, is that taking into account the possibility of a second wave, or is that assuming that we don't?
It's not. I mean, that's the typical lifeline of a development project in the normal course. I think a second wave, no one really knows what that's going to do to the timeline. So that's, we'll have to wait and see.
Gotcha. And what would you say are your most savvy clients doing to position themselves to take advantage of this market?
Well, I think it's stockpiling cash. There's a lot of what we call dry powder on the sidelines, meaning, a lot of the big developers are raising funds. RXR is raising a fund. Brookfield is raising a fund. All these, big owner-operated developers are raising funds to buy distressed assets, and so, they believe that there's going to be a fair amount of that coming down the pike. And so there was a lot of money waiting on the sidelines, waiting to do those deals. But, cautious owners, operators, developers are taking a wait and see approach, ride out the summer, perhaps come back after Labor Day and see what the world is like, and try to assess whether and to what extent it makes sense to start dipping their toes into looking into to making acquisitions.
Hmm. So you're not seeing anybody start, getting into talks with buying property yet, right?
We're seeing some of it. We are seeing some of it because, most of our clients are only making money when they are transacting real estate. And so to the extent that there are deal opportunities out there, um, groups are chasing them, and looking very carefully to see if they make sense on a long-term basis.
And are they mostly multifamily?
It runs the gamut. It runs the gamut. The development sites that are out there in large part are multifamily. That's where we're seeing people being most conservative. Unclear what the retail market is going to hold. Nobody knows what offices are going to look like. Certainly, employers are going to reduce their on-site staffs as a result of everything that's going on. There's certainly going to be a movement toward people working remotely, as everybody has seen and read. So, the volume of office occupancy is also something that remains to be seen.
Hmm. And what do you think it would take to narrow the gap between the bid and the ask that we're seeing right now? Because people who want to sell at a higher price, and people who want to
Yeah.
buy, they want to drag the price down. So what do you think it'll take
I
to bridge that gap?
I think it's going to be a matter of time. Like, like any market where the bid and the ask has a large spread, its buyers and sellers getting more realistic with respect to the value of the asset that they are negotiating over. So, while there's tons of money on the sidelines, as I said, waiting to buy, distressed mortgages, for example, those buyers want to pay anywhere between 60 and 80 cents on the dollar for those mortgages. Yet holders of mortgages that might consider selling are nowhere near there in terms of what they're willing to accept for their positions. And we're seeing that 90, 95 cents on the dollar is what some of these lenders are willing to sell for, and so there still remains a pretty wide spread between that bid and the ask. And I think it's just a matter of time before the twain shall meet.
You brought up a term, distressed debt. What exactly is that?
So that's a mortgage that is non-performing. You have a $10 million mortgage on a piece of property that would normally have a debt service payment of X dollars per month, and because the owner is not collecting rent, can't make that debt service payment, and so that mortgage is now in default. And so my $10 million mortgage is no longer worth $10 million because it's in default, because it's non-performing. And those kinds of assets, would typically start trading in the kind of environment that we're in now. That's certainly what happened in 07, 08. And that's what, a lot of the players in that space are waiting for, is for this distressed debt to start trading. So we have not seen a lot of it yet. We've seen some of it, but not a lot. And it remains to be seen in the weeks and months to come whether we see greater, activity in the buying and selling of those assets.
So it's not the real estate itself that's being sold; it's the debt behind it.
It's both. It's both. There are buyers and sellers of real estate debt, and then there are buyers and sellers of, the dirt itself. And a lot of times, there are groups that do both, or there are groups that have a debt side and an equity side. So it really depends upon what their investors want, what their investor profile is, and that usually dictates the kind of assets that they look to buy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jordan, in your over 30 years in the business, I could imagine you've developed a bit of negotiation style or a negotiation set of tactics that you use. How would you describe your negotiation style?
Uh, it's funny. When somebody once described, I was talking to somebody. I don't remember what the context was, but I take the approach of swimming like a dolphin in a sea of sharks. My approach is very measured. It's one of perspective and context. I'm not a table pounder. I'm not a yeller and screamer. I've certainly met those kinds of individuals on the other side of the table during the course of my career. And I have found that the style that I've perfected has served me well over the years. I gain client respect that way. I gain adversary respect that way. I gain respect of everybody involved in the transaction. And typically, that's the kind of attitude and approach to a deal that wins the day. And the lawyer that comes out yelling and screaming and pounding typically doesn't do doesn't do a service by his or her client. And so it's always been my strategy. Seems to work, and so I'm gonna continue to use it.
Now, how have you developed it? Was it from maybe a more senior attorney who was your mentor when you were just starting out? Was it from books? Was
I
it
think it's
from...
more a function of my general disposition in my everyday life. I think my family will describe me as a calm, cool, and collected individual. I don't get hot under the collar about the little things in life. Certainly, I get animated about the important things in life, and so I suspect my negotiation style is a byproduct of my personality and in my daily life. And again, it's served me well in the business world.
Mhm. Are there any particular books that have had an impact on your negotiation style or just how you do business in general?
No, not in particular. I was never a big reader of real estate or business books per se. So
That surprises me, really. You
yeah,
strike me as someone very,
no,
well read and
no. I mean, I certainly read my share of fiction, and some nonfiction from time to time, but I was never a big reader of, real estate or the Wall Street books per se.
hmm but the trade magazines, you
Oh,
do keep
I
up
mean,
with, right?
I probably get a dozen, email newsletters a day, and I try as efficiently as possible to sift through it to just to get a sense of the market, a sense of what people are doing,
Yeah.
trends and the like, to be able to, represent my clients as best as possible, given what I see going around
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Aside from the Real Deal, Real Estate Weekly, the New York Times, what publications do you have read?
I read Globe Street has a number of publications on a daily basis,
Globe Street, is
commercial.
that exclusively real estate or?
It's exclusively real estate, yeah. Commercial Observer has a email publication. You mentioned the Real Deal. I read the New York Law Journal several times a week, and that's what keeps me abreast of what's going on.
How would you say when you're negotiating with somebody who is, as you said earlier, an adversary, um, how do you balance understanding the other side's perspective, maybe showing some empathy for that, for their stance, without being that perceived as a sign of weakness? How do you balance that?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I've represented both sides of the table in most real estate contexts. So, for example, I've represented borrowers and lenders in loan transactions. I've represented landlords and tenants in lease transactions. I've represented buyers and sellers in sale transactions. And so that gives me perspective on what the other guy is thinking and wanting in terms of a deal and in terms of a negotiation. And not to be cliche, but putting yourself in the other guy's shoes to understand what he or she needs and wants, is gives you a leg up in terms of trying to get to a position on one or more issues to get a deal done for your client. So
Are there any mistakes that you see people making in negotiations that actually backfire and weaken their position?
I guess I find that the biggest weakness that I see in folks on the other side of the table is trying to overreach, and taking
Overreach how?
position. Well, in taking positions and asking for things that are so far out of the market that it makes you, um, it gives you a loss of credibility. There's no sense of perspective or what is reasonable. And when you have somebody on the other side that is asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars, when no one in their right mind, would ever, get to that point in a transaction, that to me is, a waste of time, probably produces excess legal fees, on the other side, and is not a situation that certainly, that I abide by. And so I see that as something that, when players in the marketplace, come out of the gate, with those kinds of, so far out of the market positions, it weakens their position in the negotiation, in my opinion.
hmm So an anchor that's just so far off, it's not rooted in any reality
That
whatsoever.
that's right.
Got it.
That's right. That's right.
So before you enter into a negotiation, um, walk me through a bit of your preparation. Do you write lists of what are things that you can concede, what are things that are absolute musts for your clients? Like, how do you prepare for that?
Well, it depends upon the transaction. I mean, typically, if I'm working on a lease or a loan document or a purchase and sale agreement, my process is to review the document and come up with, at least initially, a major issues list, which I review carefully with the client. We determine, what the client's position is with respect to each of those issues and where the client is willing to go on each issue. and oftentimes we do it in stages depending upon the timetable of the transaction or the complexity of the transaction, where we start at point A knowing that we may go back to point B or point C in the negotiation. And then you whittle it down, and after the major issues are dealt with between the lawyers and the business people, then typically the lawyers, get to work on the drafting nits and nats that go into the final draft of the documents that don't really necessitate the client's specific attention, and that's typically the process. And most lawyers in the deals that we deal with on a daily basis typically go through the transaction process that way.
Hmm. Jordan, if you had a new associate at your firm and you wanted to impart, the most sound negotiation advice you could on that person to jumpstart their career, what would it be?
I mean, there's nothing in particular. I mean, we at Schotz, we pride ourselves on mentoring our young lawyers. We have an active summer associate program, and we hire from that summer associate program. Um, we emphasize attending contract negotiations, and for the litigators, attending court appearances, and they will participate in conference calls and participate in closings. And I think it's just watching the people that have done it, so often, and understanding what the process is, that is the best way, to teach young lawyers. I don't think there's anything in particular other than what we've discussed, in this interview, that I would necessarily impart. But seeing and understanding, the way it works in the real world, as opposed to, studying cases in a case book, which is how you get trained as a lawyer, is a big, is a large part of growing and maturing and becoming, a professional in the legal field.
So you would say observing the negotiations firsthand,
Yeah.
seeing the dialogue in real time.
Yeah, and actually, digging into the documents and doing a first pass on a markup of a contract or a loan agreement or a lease, and then walking through it, step by step, is a training process that we at Schotz, adhere to, and try to get associates as involved in the nitty gritty of the documents as much as possible.
Yeah. What would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your work?
Um, I think client satisfaction. I'm very big on responsiveness. That's something that we stress heavily in our firm, is making sure that every phone call, every email, every text message gets returned within minutes. That's something that our clients repeatedly compliment us on. And oftentimes the reason why we have clients come to us from other lawyers because of a lack of responsiveness. And so, I believe, and we believe, that that's a huge part of client satisfaction. And so, when I successfully close a deal for my client and know that it's because of our responsiveness, it's because of our professionalism, it's because of our expertise, and that the client is happy with the result, that's, for me, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Hmm. But how do you balance that with, if you're reviewing documents and you want to stay focused on the task, can't answering emails every few minutes be distracting?
It can be, but you got to do it all. You just have to, with experience, be able to prioritize, and figure out, what to do and when to do it, to keep both the client happy and to adhere to your timetables with respect to, when documents have to get done to get the deal closed. It's just something that you learn over time.
Is there anything that you're working on now that you'd like people to know about, or any final remarks, Jordan?
I mean, we're doing, we're in a very interesting, difficult time now. We're certainly seeing a diminution in deal flow, especially in the retail and office sectors, as I've indicated. We've got a bunch of multifamily deals that are in various stages of negotiation and closing. We're doing a lot of lease amendments between landlords and tenants, forbearing from collecting rent under the circumstances. We're doing a lot of loan document amendments in connection with, forbearance of loan payments and the like. But, I think that is temporary. And I think, over the course of the next several months, we'll see where the world goes. And as a result, where the deal flow goes in terms of its volume, because once these, 3, 4, 5, 6 month forbearance agreements start to expire, borrowers and lenders, landlords and tenants, buyers and sellers will need to determine, where they want to go with respect to, their relationships, whether it's a loan, a lease, or a purchase and sale. And I think, over the next, 2, 3, 4 months, that will be telling in terms of the direction of the market and where we as lawyers are going to be needed in order to represent our clients in those kinds of transactions.
Got it. All right, Jordan, final question.
Sure.
Final question. And it's all you have to do is just finish this sentence, okay?
Oh my goodness.
Yep. Jordan J. Metzger is...
Oh my God. I don't know. Lawyer, family man, sax player, not necessarily in that order. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic, Jordan. Love that answer.
All right.
All righty. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Stay safe.
You
And
too.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you on the next episode.